Members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus are catching heat following their decision to cave to pressure and withdraw a letter calling for the Biden administration to, maybe recalibrate its approach to the war in Ukraine. Now, I want to emphasize that the excerpts I'm about to read to you from the letter have nothing wrong with them. In fact, the letter itself, the entirety of the letter, had nothing wrong with it. It didn't capitulate to Putin. It didn't demonize Ukrainians. It's not apologism for Putin's actions at all. It was a measured letter calling for the Biden administration to push for diplomatic talks to end this war that is brutalizing Ukrainians, destroying their cities, and of course is costing tens of billions of dollars in military aid to Ukraine, and will cost tens of billions more very, very soon. I'll give you those details as well. But first, here are some excerpts from the letter that received the vicious response it did. Given the destruction created by this war for Ukraine and the world, as well as the risk of catastrophic escalation, we also believe it is in the interests of Ukraine, the United States, and the world to avoid a prolonged conflict. For this reason, we urge you to pair the military and economic support the United States has provided to Ukraine with a proactive diplomatic push, redoubling efforts to seek a realistic framework for a ceasefire. So far, so good. I mean, I thought the broadly speaking left was in complete agreement on this, whether you're a moderate Democrat or a progressive. I thought we were all on the same page, right? We should be supportive of diplomacy. But now all of a sudden you hear members of the Democratic Party argue that we shouldn't negotiate with terrorists, which, I'm old enough to remember that was the talking point from the right wing during the Bush administration. But let me continue. Again, this is directly from the letter that progressives have now withdrawn. This is consistent with your recognition that there's going to have to be a negotiated settlement here, and your concern that Vladimir Putin doesn't have a way out right now, and I'm trying to figure out what we do about that. That is what Biden had previously said. Let me continue with more excerpts from this letter because I want you to get a sense of what they were calling for, so you really understand what this is about and how, again, it's not about being an apologist for Putin and his war crimes. We're under no illusions regarding the difficulties involved in engaging Russia, given its outrageous and illegal invasion of Ukraine and its decision to make additional illegal annexations of Ukrainian territory. However, if there is a way to end the war while preserving a free and independent Ukraine, let's not forget that's what they're calling for, a free and independent Ukraine. It is America's responsibility to pursue every diplomatic avenue to support such a solution that is acceptable to the people of Ukraine. So the language is important. We want to make sure this is acceptable to the people of Ukraine. They need to be on board for these negotiations. We want a free and sovereign Ukraine. You guys hear what I'm saying here? Like what they're very clear about how the priority is to end this as peacefully as possible while maintaining the sovereignty of Ukraine and protecting Ukrainian lives. But let me continue, there's more. Such a framework would presumably include incentives to end hostilities, including some form of sanctions relief, meaning sanctions relief toward Russia, and bring together the international community to establish security guarantees for a free and independent Ukraine that are acceptable for all parties, particularly Ukrainians. The alternative to diplomacy is protracted war. True, they're right about that, with both its attendant certainties and catastrophic and unknowable risks. So far, everything is 100% accurate. There isn't anything callous about this letter toward Ukrainians and what they've been going through. This is a call to be supportive in regard to diplomatic talks and negotiations. There was nothing in this letter saying that Ukraine should just give up huge portions of their territory. No. The whole point is, hey, what can we as the United States do to support the notion of Russia and Ukraine coming together, with obviously the United States serving as some sort of mediator, to get to a peaceful solution. So there's no more blood spilled. But no, according to moderate Democrats, that amounts to negotiating with terrorists. Again, a right-wing talking point that we heard incessantly under the Bush administration. And this is what the problem is when the Democratic Party absorbs the never Trump Republicans. Trump wasn't just disastrous for the country, he was disastrous for the Democratic Party. When you have people like Liz Cheney serving as like some sort of hero for Democrats because of her involvement in the January 6th investigations, we're in a little bit of trouble. And I'm seeing a lot of these Bush era talking points in regard to foreign policy being regurgitated by Democrats. And I think it's sick. Finally, they write, in conclusion, we urge you to make vigorous diplomatic efforts in support of a negotiated settlement and ceasefire, engage in direct talks with Russia, explore prospects for a new European security arrangement acceptable to all parties that will allow for a sovereign and independent Ukraine, and in coordination with our Ukrainian partners, seek a rapid end to the conflict and reiterate this goal as America's chief priority. And again, apparently that is incredibly offensive to some Ukrainian officials who have now become very used to us sending tens of billions of dollars in military aid and economic funding to Ukraine. And it certainly upset some moderate Democrats. So Pramila Jayapal today announced that she will be withdrawing this letter from the Biden administration. We also learned that this letter was drafted in June of this year, but they just hadn't sent it out. And Pramila Jayapal is claiming that members of her staff put the letter out there without her permission. And so even though it has 30 people who have signed it, 30 progressives who had signed this letter, many of them spoke to the press and said that they were completely unaware that the letter was going to be released in the way that it was released. But I do want to give credit to some of these progressive lawmakers who said that they still support the overall message here, which is we should be pushing for diplomacy, not endless war. I'm gonna go to them in just a moment. But I want to remind you of the double-edged sword when it comes to military funding. Because if the US's military funding towards Ukraine is giving the Ukrainian government the idea that maybe diplomacy isn't the right way to go because we're being bolstered by the United States. And so maybe we don't need to negotiate. Maybe we need to just fight this war and avoid going to the negotiating table for a possible ceasefire. In April of this year, pretty early on in the war, Zelensky wanted diplomacy. He said this, I'm quoting him verbatim. I want to stop the war, to end it. There's a diplomatic path, he said. There is a military path. So any mentally healthy person always chooses the diplomatic path because he or she knows, even if it is difficult, it can prevent the loss of thousands, tens of thousands, and with such neighbors, hundreds of thousands, and maybe even millions of lives. There may be losses of millions of people. We don't want that. And any leader, whether he wants it personally or not, has no right to cancel the diplomatic path. Now, since then, Ukraine has received a great deal of military funding, and I do want to go to those details in just a second, the actual numbers. I should also note that Politico reported recently that Ukraine is not ready for negotiations at this point. So they went from being ready for negotiations to no longer wanting to engage in negotiations, especially because its months-long counteroffensive has been successful to date, and there's no indication Putin is ready to deal either. So again, getting that military funding from the United States with like no strings attached communicates to Ukrainians that maybe we don't need diplomatic talks. Let's just keep fighting this war because the US is gonna continue bolstering this effort. Now, I don't have a problem with the US fulfilling its commitments to Ukraine because the US succeeded in getting Ukraine to give up its nuclear weapons in the 1990s in exchange for security guarantees. And I think it's important to fulfill those promises. But my interpretation isn't that those security guarantees just meant blank checks to military contractors and weapons, manufacturers. And when you look at the numbers, we've already given quite a bit. And we're poised to give a lot more, again, in military aid. So let's take a look at these numbers real quick. Let's go to the first graph, graphic 10 here. And there is a group known as the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. It's a European group, so they measure the amount of money given by the EU and the United States and other donor countries through euros, right? So the United States, for instance, gave 52.3 billion euros between January 24th to October 3rd of 2022. And this is specifically for government support. So just, funding that might go toward like a humanitarian effort as well. Now, if you want to convert the numbers, according to NBC News, Congress has already allocated $65 billion in funding for Ukraine. Okay, now let's go to the next graph. So this shows you how it's broken down specifically by military aid, right? Not humanitarian or economic aid, just military aid. And you can see that the United States has given the most. So that's a huge amount of money, weapons and equipment, financial aid with military purpose. And so you've got, again, tens of billions of dollars in military aid. And if you think it's just gonna end there, keep in mind that just last month, Congress agreed to allocate $12 billion to Ukraine's war effort. And they are poised to approve a $50 billion military aid package to Ukraine before January. They want to get that passed prior to Republicans taking charge in the House of Representatives. Now, Kevin McCarthy had put out a statement indicating that if they win the House, they're gonna potentially put a stop to military funding toward Ukraine. Maybe the timing of this letter is what was so jarring to people because they felt that progressives were aligning with Kevin McCarthy on this issue. But I will say it is not a good look when you have Republicans of all people positioning themselves as the anti-war individuals. And you have Democrats positioning themselves as the party that doesn't believe in negotiating with our foes or negotiating with terrorists. This weird realignment is super uncomfortable, but the weakest part about all of this is the fact that progressives caved to pressure and decided to withdraw the letter. And Pramila Jayapal is looking for some, more power. She's positioning herself for leadership roles in the Democratic Party. And that might be playing a role in why she decided to go through with this incredibly weak move. But she says in a statement, let's go to graphic 9 here. The proximity of these statements created the unfortunate appearance that Democrats, who have strongly and unanimously supported and voted for every package of military, strategic, and economic assistance to the Ukrainian people, are somehow aligned with Republicans who seek to pull the plug on American support for President Vladimir Zelensky and the Ukrainian forces. I mean, it is incredible. Go back to the Bush era. And the idea that you have Republicans trying to, look, I know that their motivations aren't really anti-war, so let's be clear about that. But in terms of optics, in the way that this looks to American voters, it's not a good look, right? When you have people really suffering and struggling here within our borders, pretty soon, hundreds of billions of dollars being funneled to defense contractors for this war in Ukraine. And then you have Democrats saying, no, we should not be supporting diplomatic talks. And by the way, who knows if Putin is even interested in it, if he would actually engage in that in good faith. But the point is we should try, we should at least try to end this as soon as possible to prevent people from dying. That's it, that should be the main goal. And based on the reaction that I'm seeing from the Democratic Party right now, that doesn't appear to be their goal. And that's really disturbing.